For the people that say "Make America Great Again," when was it great? They are probably referring to the post-World War II boom. The economy was strong. American manufacturing was still strong. The ideal was the nuclear family. Of course, they don't take into account a great deal of social injustice to minorities and women. This is my take, as I often see the post-war era bandied about as an ideal to work back to. Of course that's problematic. After World War II, the USA was practically the only world superpower that hadn't experienced warfare within its borders. As a result, our manufacturing and transportation systems made it uniquely profitable to various industries. The economy boomed and created an era of unsustainable wealth for white people. During the 50s, POC were still subjugated by redlining and discriminatory laws that excluded them from this boom, both in the North and especially in the South. The U.S. was continuously engaged in coups and destabilization in South America to maximize our interests at the costs of Hispanic lives. That's not to mention women's rights issues, as this was pre-Roe v. Wade and divorce was more taboo, in the dismal state of LGBT rights back then. Also note that, antithetical to conservative dogma, this boom was when the U.S. had record-high corporate taxes and taxes for the rich, lessening the burden on the low and middle classes. So for those who personally experienced this time, I'm not one of them. The implicit fact is that the prosperity of that time was limited to heteronormative European American nuclear families, and was only possible due to systematic subjugation of minority groups. A non-zero percentage of MAGA people know all of the above and want it anyway, which is impossible without bringing back discriminatory policies or some sort of ethnostatism. They seem to be fine with that. To a time when dad worked a steady job and mom stayed home and made him lunch in one of those metal lunch pails. When people just laughed at drunk driving. When everyone went to church on Sunday and only prayed to Jesus. When my son got caught doing something bad, it was boys will be boys and the real criminals either were black, or looked like the Bugs Bunny henchmen with 5 o'clock shadows. But don't worry about them, Andy Griffith will take care of that. When companies paid fair wages, not because lazy unions were tirelessly fighting for them, but because businesses were run by George Bailey, a fair-minded small-town kind of business owner. When things were easy for people like us and I didn't have to think too much about why, let alone feel any guilt about it. When problems like domestic violence were hushed up, but honesty, she probably had it coming. I hear they were atheists. When little kids never were abused. And Notre Dame was sure to win the national title again. How about them Yankees? Before I had to contemplate there may be real problems outside my bubble. Before my town became run down. Before people I don't know complained about things I don't understand, and before I was expected to ever have to change. Before America turned into living caricature of a burned-out, alcoholic former beauty pageant who believes she only needs to put on a happy face and act positive to recapture whatever former glory she once had. However vain, however materialistic, narcissistic, however fleeting. All that glittered was once gold. They don't need to have a specific time in mind to believe it. Our memories are selective and generally favor positive memories, and will even give our memories a positive spin. It helps keep us sane and not turn into nervous wrecks. We do the same looking at memories that aren't even ours, such as history. Also privilege and racism. My above comment doesn't mean there aren't ignorant and shitty people. That's the beauty of the phrase. It's so abstract and vague that it only refers to whatever made-up time in the reader's or listener's head. It's exploiting the basic human tendency toward nostalgia, where we ignore the negative parts. To some it's the innocence of childhood, others when they didn't have to consider that they might be insulting others, while others may look back to the prime of their youth. Basically, if you fall for such a simple phrase, you're a simple person. Before the immigrants got here, any of them, including those fucks who crossed the Bering Strait 10,000 years ago like they owned the place. For those of you wondering, I'm a raccoon. With all these slogans from the right wing you need to add "for me" at the end to reveal their true meaning. Make America great again for me. Return to greatness for me. Obama isn't working for me. Restore America now for me. Unleash the American dream for me. New possibilities for me. They don't give a shit about anything or anyone, it's a purely egotistical fuck you, got mine mindset. I think people look back favorably on World War II and the years that followed. It's the last war the US unequivocally won. A war that had clearly defined villains, and one that had a good portion of the US actually united behind a common cause. Not to mention the economic boom around that time. Things really started to get more complicated after that. Wars started becoming impossible to win because the conditions of victory could not longer be so clearly defined. And the further back you look, the easier it is to just look at the good stuff, and forget the rest. Granted, people also tend to just always think back to their earlier lives and see that world as better back then. And that's a trend that will never go away. But, that's also the nature of conservatism at its core. People committed to traditional values and ideas. Until the world stops changing, that means a big part of being a conservative is wanting to keep things the way they were. Resisting change. When Trump says make America great again, he's referring to when America was an economic powerhouse, back in the 60s and 70s. What people like him, who are usually racist or sexist anyway, don't realize, is that America wasn't great back then if you were a black person, or a woman. I think people misunderstand what the saying means. A lot of people assume it's demanding that America goes back to how it was at a certain point of history, as opposed to being great in an abstract sense where it's a prospering nation and the world leader as it has been in the past. Think of it as less of a period of time and more of a mentality, being the country that was producing skyscrapers, airplanes, cars, and much more while the rest of the world was playing catch-up just to reach that point. America was great when we fought against the tyrannical government that oppressed everyone. The US isn't perfect and in my opinion isn't the best country, however it has had its moments of greatness, like taking on a much bigger country that had an actual military while we only had what was essentially a militia. Not a Trump supporter, but I believe when people say this, the first timeline that pops up in my mind was the post-World War II 1946 to 1965 period, because the country had an economic boom, houses were being built, the US was a superpower, families were strong units, the auto industry was booming, kids going to school. The reality of the timeline, it wasn't great. If you were a woman, an ethnic minority, LGBTQ, you were a second-class citizen. Black families were steered away from white neighborhoods. In 1951 a black family was chased out of Cicero, Eel by white mobs, and in 1957 a black family moved into Levittown and was met with opposition. There was the communist scare, and the country was conservative. The 1960s were a response to that time. Women, minorities, everyone fought against societal standards. Please, like this video and comment your thoughts. If you like this channel, please, subscribe for more Reddit content you can listen on a go.